Hi everyone, Jay here from Jade Productions, back with another video, and as you can tell by the title, we're looking at Beginner's Guide to Lumineth Realm Lords. Now, the Lumineth Realm Lords are one of the newer factions in Age of Sigmar, and they are elves from the realm of light, raised and created by Teclis to be a new elven civilization, greater and better than the high elves of the old world, and what happened is they got high on some crystal meth and basically got so high until they figured out that they could destroy everything, and then they found enlightenment. So, they're your typical stoner elves. And to play into that theme, we have plenty of stone-themed stuff. So, talking seriously about the army though for a second, let's delve into them. So, the Lumineth Realm Lords on the table are a very elite army with an emphasis on magic and defense. So, in terms of other elven armies, they're typically, on their base rules, until you delve into them a little more, are essentially the antithesis of what you come to expect from elves, typically in most settings of Warhammer. So, elves typically experience a sort of, they're famous for being fast, aggressive, skilled, and magically powerful. So what these guys have here is that they're actually focused on defense, and they move slow. They're still very elite and skilled though, and they still have incredible magic. This army plays very much like an iron phalanx. They're very good in terms of holding objectives. They have ways of really peppering and putting out mortal wounds. They don't have a lot of ways to deal with everything. They are kind of specialized in terms of how their units sort of work. And there's kind of three theories about how you can put together a Lumineth Realm Lords army. And depending on which one of these you subscribe to, it's going to influence what you need to buy in what numbers. And that's where you just need to be aware of getting into the Lumineth Realm Lords, is that this is going to be an elite army. So you're not going to be buying much, but what you are going to be buying is ludicrously expensive because Games Workshop wants your money and your organs. So, delving into this, the first school of how you can build some Lumineth focuses on the Venari. So, the Venari are the very standard troops that they have. These are the Dawn Riders, these are their Sentinels, and their Wardens. And these are basically the things that make up your phalanx, and you're going to be getting a lot of these. So, Venari, Dawn Riders are your cavalry, who are experts in killing large hordes. They have lots of attacks. The less wounds and the larger the horde, the more damage they deal. And they're also the fastest thing in this army. Especially once you give them some magic. Cast some spells on them, and, they can be flying up the board. They're not the most competent objective holders, however, because they are cavalry. They do lack the model count unless you're bringing them in large numbers, but they are expensive both points-wise and model-wise, so keep that in mind. The foundation of any Venari army, though, and this is where you need to be aware of this when you go to get your collection together, is, especially if you're focusing on Venari, there's the Aurora Wardens. Now, these are your battle line. These are, for those of you who are unfamiliar, battle line is the core of your army. At 2,000 points, you're always going to need 3 battle line. But the Lumineth have an interesting way in which they have their battle line system working. For the Lumineth, the Venari Wardens are always battle line. But for every unit of Venari Wardens that you bring, essentially, you're allowed to bring one of the other Venari units as battle line. So, it's interesting in that. So, for every unit of, for example, you say you want to have a unit of an army consisting of 2 units of Aurora Wardens, and then you bring 3 units of Sentinels, the Sentinels being your archers. So you have 2 battle line there from the Wardens. Now each of those Wardens can then make up to 2 of those units of Sentinels battle line. That leftover third unit of Sentinels, however, will not be battle line. It will be an other unit. So that's how it works. For every unit of, if you want to, you can potentially field your entire army as battle line outside of characters and cow monsters. But for everything, you're going to have to bring and buy Wardens. So when you go to buy your Lumineth, you will need to buy a minimum, unless you're building the Aurora build, exclusively Aurora, not mixing and matching, that's our third one. If you're building pure Venari, or a mixed Venari force, you will need a minimum 2 boxes of Wardens, or 2 units of Wardens. After that, you can bring on and expand your army. But the core of your army is always going to be those spearmen. You're always going to need at least 2 of them in a Venari build, simply because if you have one in a 2,000 point list, if you bring 1 unit of Venari, you then, of those Wardens, and you bring then another unit of Sentinels, you only have 2 battle line, and you need a third one. So so any other Sentinels that you've got, they won't count. So you're going to need them. I think I've made that clear. So, with that, we have that going on. Now, the Dawn Riders can also be conditional battle line. For example, for every unit, I've used the Sentinels as an example so far, but for every unit of Wardens you bring, you can also then bring 1 unit of Dawn Rider Cavalry, who will also count as battle line. It's just, it's the Wardens that make the other units count as battle line. So, that's the crux of how the army works. From there, the question becomes your heroes, essentially. Your needing of your minimum heroes, you're going to need at least 1 guy. In terms of generic heroes, you only have 2 in your entire army. So, you have 3 named characters, but only 2 generic guys. So keep that in mind. And keep in mind that named characters tend to be really expensive. They can't take a relic, and they can't take a command trait. But typically they have some other things. In terms of what you can get, in terms of what you should probably buy early on, again, if you're going for the Venari build, the Skinari Cathalar, or Sinari Cathalar, I think it's pronounced. This is the lady with the goblet, and she pretty much is your wizard. She can be your general. She's a generic commander. She has some okay buffing abilities that help you get around battle shock and bravery, because, as we'll get into in a little bit, you have a lot of different things to keep track of in this army, and a lot of it modifies your bravery, which is not fantastic, actually, and it can get worse as the battle goes on. So you're going to need a minimum 1 of those, and then that's for a Venari build. So that's that. The other kind is the Aelfs build. So the Aelfs is even more elite than the standard Venari Lumineth. And pretty much the Aelfs are basically battle line if you're playing as one of the city-states of Emmetrica. Now, that's only if you're playing Emmetrica. So, if you want to do an Aelfs build as a different city, you are going to have to once again get the Aelfs Wardens. Just putting that out there. So, but if you're playing full Emmetrica and you're going full Aelfs, you can take Aelfs Stone Guard as your units, as your conditional battle line. In which case, you're going to need to pick up a minimum 3 units. I really like the Aelfs Stone Guard as units. They're really good. They've got 2 wounds, pretty hard. They have a pretty good weapon output. They have 2 different weapon options, both of which I really like. I'm personally a fan of the picks more, in terms of aesthetics. And then they have a whole bunch of defensive buffs, and they can even force guys off objectives. And for their points cost at 100 points, I'd pretty much always be taking them in units of 10 to 15, to be honest. Pretty much 10, I think is good. 200 points for the 20 wounds. But you could have a max unit of 15. That's a little pricey, but they're still very good. I'm a huge fan of the Aelfs Stone Guard. So, that's that. And then to lead them, you of course would want the Aelfs Stone Mage. Now, you can take Avanlor and Stoneheart. Again, I'm not covering in terms of what you would need in terms of named characters. The named characters will literally work with every single kind, all of the 3 different kinds of builds that Lumineth can encompass. But for the Aelf build in particular, obviously the Aelf Stone Mage is something that you're going to want, simply because he is designed to help enhance the things that the Aelf want, particularly your Spirits of the Mountains. He has some spells, he works well with your Stone Guard, so there's that. The third way is to mix and match. This is a bit Skaven-like in terms of how the Lumineth are laid out. They have these sort of sub-specialist factions, but you're always going to have certain things that are base if you want to mix. In this case, you just apply everything that I've said before. In this case, you can essentially get yourself 1 unit of Venari, Wardens, and then bring along a unit of Dawn Riders and Sentinels, and then you can grab some Aelf if you're a Metrica. But if you're not a Metrica, you once again, will have to get 2 units of Wardens. That really doesn't change, unless you're a Metrica. But we'll get to that in a minute. So that's kind of the basics of this. High defensive army, and you're going to have to buy certain things because of their restrictiveness of how their armies are built. So just be aware of that when you go to plan your army. So, now we'll take a moment and just kind of talk about their battle traits. And we'll talk about just a little bit more in terms of what you need to know getting to go with them. So, as we covered, they have this sort of crystalline stuff which makes them enlightened but a little high. So, in your army, you have the Aether Quartz Reserve. It's kind of similar. Every unit has at least one of these, and you can essentially, once per phase, a unit can use them to get one of 4 different bonuses, but then they suffer a -1 bravery. Very similar to the Caradon Overlord's Aether Gold shares. And these are used to make your units go from, hey, these are pretty good, to, oh yes, it's time for killing. So you have the Heightened Sensors, which you can do it before a unit shoots or fights, so it can be used for both, and you get to add +1 to your hits for attacks for that phase. Sweet. Now you can have guys hitting on 3s or 2s, most of the time 2s, which is good. You want that. You don't have a lot of hard-hitting attacks. You have a lot of really efficient attacks, and this will increase that further. It's probably not the best one, but it's very good. The best one, I would say, for this army is the Heightened Reflexes, which is the +1 save that you can pop, and either in the shooting or combat phase, and to get you +1 to your save. Most of the time, this will take you to a dreaded 3-up save. Oh yes. Put some Mystic Shield on that for 3-ups rerolling 1s. This can help make your guys really immovable and plays into the whole fact that they're really defensive. Some of their guys ignore rend. You put them in their Shining Companies, which is something we'll talk about in a moment, with your Venari units getting -1 to hit, and all of a sudden your guys become really hard to shift off of objectives, which is a good thing. That's where they go. So they move, they don't hit super hard. They kind of have to wear the opponent down through their attacks over time, which is where your mortal wound output comes in, which we'll talk about in a moment. But overall, what this army excels at is using their magic to help them move onto objectives and being really hard to get off of them, and then just racking up the points. that said, you, of course, obviously have ways to go on the offensive and deal with everything. You're particularly defensive in the first turn, making you very, pretty much a hard counter to first turn charge armies. Your durability with this army is just about on par with the basic units of the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. So you perform very well. The Ossiarch Bone Reapers are better in terms of durability simply because they can do attrition with resurrections and stuff. You have a lot of other ways of increasing your defenses to make it so that every elven live lost will be a feat for your opponent. And when you need to go on the offensive, you have elves and cow elves with hammers. So then you have the magical boost, which gives you either a +1 or a reroll to your cast in your hero phase for a caster. That's good. Your magic is very important. And if you don't have Teclis in your army, your magic is always a little bit unreliable. So this increasing the reliability of your magic, which is very good in one particular spell lore and almost essential, you're going to want that. Not to mention, just about everything in your army is a spellcaster. So, yeah. Or at least the core of your army is a spellcaster. Then you have the Magical Insight. You can cast an extra spell. Also very good. I would definitely say that the Magical Insight is probably tied with the Magical Boost for second best of these effects. And then Heightened Reflexes, I would say, is the best. Simply because you want to survive. An army that's hard to kill but can keep on killing is really powerful in Age of Sigmar. So, you can absorb Despair, and this comes into place when it comes to Cathalars. This is a general ability on top of the Cathalar's already abilities to mess with Bravery. And this is basically, it allows you to basically reduce the effects of the Aether Quartz Reserve, where you take the -1 Bravery and try and shove it off onto other enemy targets. It doesn't really affect units, but even if someone is immune to Bravery, you can still lower their Bravery just to avoid your Bravery being lowered. So, sure, while it doesn't have any practical effects on certain armies that are nearly immune to morale and battle shock, you still lower their Bravery. Even if they don't take that battle shock test, you're still lowering their Bravery as part of the effect when you're resolving it to avoid your unit's Bravery being lowered. And that's all that really matters. The fact that your elves don't run away. Because that is probably your biggest weakness in this army. And if you let your Bravery go unchecked and you have a Cathalar nearby, you don't have a Cathalar, and you start using Aether Golds like crazy, which is part of why they're pretty much mandatory in Venari builds, then you're going to struggle. You have lightning reactions. So when you get to select a unit to fight, you then get to pick 2 units to fight instead of 1. And, they fight, like, at the same time. So, very good lightning reactions. It's kind of almost, not quite almost fights first, but it will allow you to get, again, as we talked about, you have a lot of attacks, a lot of efficient attacks that aren't particularly hard-hitting. You don't have a lot of multi-damage attacks in this army. And so your attacks really have to wear the opponent down over time with sheer efficiency of your hits and wounds. So this is where that comes in. This will allow you to do that, and it'll allow you to compete with those armies that have way too many attacks, or way too many hard-hitting attacks with lots and lots of damage and rend. Your Shining Companies. So this is something that is more important for Venari. So when a unit of Sentinels, Wardens, or Dawn Riders are set up in the deployment phase, where all their models are touching the bases of at least 2 other models in the same unit, that makes a Shining Company. So you want to actually run these guys in formations and blocks, and you want to try your hardest to keep them in those formations. Now, the bonuses to this is that, if you lose this, you can't get it back, so you have to watch where you're assigning your casualties. But at the same time, you get -1 to hit your unit while they're a shining company, but they can't run or charge, and they only get a pile-in distance of 1. So it's very much a defensive stance, which is pretty nice. Typically, Dawn Riders are not something I would encourage running them in terms of letting them get charged. You always want to get the charge with those cavalry, even if the Dawn Riders are a little more forgiving. This pretty much lets all your units assume a defensive stance, but it slows their movement. So the things you want to be assuming this first turn are your archers and your spearmen, your sentinels and wardens. Your cavalry, if you're really in an objective game and you really need to take those objectives, this is not the stance to be putting them in, because you want them to be running. But at the same time, you could just leave them like this and then use some spells to help shunt them up the board to objectives. But, moving faster is always better. Of course, you can leave these anytime you want, you just can't get back into them, so keep that in mind. You have the Enduring as a rock for your Aelfs. Pretty much, before the first battle round, and at the start of any of your hero phases, you can set up any number of Aelfs units into the mountain stance. And until the end of your hero phase, they ignore Rend 1. So Rend 2 will still carve through their armor, so they're 4-ups. Essentially, they'll either always, if you're in this stance, you'll always either have a 4-up or a 6-up. There's no in between for you. If you're in this stance, obviously. If you're not in this stance, well then, sure. And then the Aelfs also have Tectonic Force, which is at the end of every combat phase, yours or your opponent's. You can nominate an enemy unit within 1 inches of one of your Aelfs units, and you can then shove them 2 inches in a direction, so long as they are more than 1 inches from any Aelfs units. And then you can pile in 3 inches. This is a really complicated rule in terms of wording, but once you see it in practice, you'll understand that it's as simple as, okay, combat phase, the combat has ended, we've ended that phase, end of combat, my Aelfs unit over there fighting on this objective, okay, I want you to move them 2 inches that way, yep, and then I will pile in. Cool. You're pushing them off the objective. And then another unit over there will do it, the cow over there will do it. Okay? So, now we'll just briefly address some of the rest of the things when it comes to this army. Now that we understand their basic traits, those give us an insight into how they're supposed to play. And we'll talk about their different command traits and stuff. So, overall, once I said, this army is very focused on spell casting. So when you go to your generic command traits, as I said, only the Cathalar and Alarith Stone Wizard currently are currently generic characters. So they're the only things that you can make generals and get them command traits. And their command traits are pretty mediocre, especially the generic ones. But they're not particularly bad. They're all about enhancing the things that your army already has. So the Cathalar has a fantastic supporting spell lore, whereas the Alarith has a slightly more offensive spell lore. So both of their command traits are more about just enhancing that. For example, the immediate ones that I like on the Cathalar is the War Master, which gives you an extra CP on a 4+ at the start of your hero phase. Again, this leads into the support because the Cathalar doesn't have any command abilities, but the 3 generic command abilities, the reroll saves, reroll hits, reroll, pass battle shock, those are just fine by themselves. You're not a particularly CP hungry army, but you do have some CP synergies that you can do, so you can make them into a bit of CP battery. But the Spellmaster, which lets you re-roll one failed casting attempt, lets you pretend that you're Eldar from 40k and a Farseer, because, again, you have those spells, they're really important, and they're not always the most reliable. Spells are not always the most reliable, so anything that increases that, very good, because once again, Cathalar, very good spell lore available to them. Or the Loremaster, once again, you have, the Cathalar ones, it has 3, they're all good in some way for enhancing what they already do and making your army more reliable. So you can't really go wrong with them. The Aelfs is a bit of a different story. He's got things that either put him on the front line or make him harder to kill or increase his the number of spells he can cast. They tend to be pretty meh, on the other hand. The Majestic with, messing with bravery is one of those things of, again, messing with bravery has its pros and cons. Boosting your bravery is okay, but at the same time, we could be knowing an extra spell. Or we could get an extra 3 wounds to help keep him alive. He shouldn't really be in the front lines anyway, but those extra 3 wounds might help protect him from being sniping. So, these ones are a bit of a mixed bag. So when you're picking him to be your general, perhaps he's not your best choice, but, he has his uses. Typically, I would suggest making something else your general, maybe a named character, like, Avanlor, but if you're going to make him your general, the Loremaster or Enduring are the ways to go. And then, of course, they both have 3 relics each. Each one, these ones, once again, these ones are a bit more schizophrenic, unfortunately. You have, for the Cathalar, some Blade of Leaping Gold, which gives you 3 extra attacks, but you have a terrible weapon. You should never be in combat. If you are in combat with your Cathalar, they're dead, and that's bad. The Phoenix Stone, for resurrecting your guy on a 6, potentially powerful, but then, but the important thing about it is to explain the Phoenix Stone a little bit and why it's potentially powerful and not just trash, is that it's any friendly Lumineth Realm Lord's hero slain within 12 inches of the bearer. So that could be Teclis or Avanlor, or, Sword Guy. Damn, I forget his name. Come on. I know you. You're my favorite character. Light of Eltharion. There we go. He's my favorite character amongst this line, in terms of his lore. So, there's that. But it only goes off on a 6. That's super unreliable. And then the weapon for the Cathalar is terrible, which means that the Silver Wand, which lets you cast an extra spell in your hero phase, is like, well, if I'm going to take a free relic, I'm probably going to take that one on any Cathalar I have. At the same time, the Aelfs ones are probably a bit better. So this is a case of the Cathalar have good command traits, bad relics. The Aelfs have bad command traits, good relics. So, 5+ Feel No Pain to increase its durability. The Aelfs, of course, being all about durability. And since this guy's a bit more front-liney, the Ebony Stone, which each time the bearer is affected by a spell or endless spell, they can just roll on a 4+ to just go nope. And then he's got a other thing, the Magmic Hammer, which adds 1 to the mortal wounds inflicted by Arcane Bolt. So he does 2 mortal wounds instead of 1, or D3 + 1. Sure, they're better than the Cathalar ones, with the exception of the Silver Wand. And then, of course, you have your Great Nations. Now, I'm not going to go through each of the Great Nations, but I will just summarize them. So, the Great Nation of Siar, Elven names. You'd think I'd have plenty of practice at this from Eldar names. So, CR is all about leaning into the Aether Quartz and helping you get around the Aether Quartz problem of bravery and messing with that, and basically just expanding that and giving you more Aether Quartz to work with and giving you the ability to share your Aether Quartz around. So there's that. these guys are all about leaning into that to get the most out of Aether Quartz, to get more Aether Quartz. They're almost like the Barak Urbaz of, this army, in that it's all about leaning into this one particular element. They're pretty good in terms of what they have. Their command traits pretty good, actually. Well, it's okay, actually. It's only particularly good if you put it on a fighty hero, which you don't have, unfortunately, which I just realized rereading that. Your perfect, again, your command traits and relics are wasted because, again, 3 out of your 5 characters are named characters who can't take these things. So, there is that. And they're very, very specific. So, until something else comes out, until they get more units, this is not a good unit. But it's still got that going with it. Iliatha is very much playing into the Venari. And this is very much you take this to stick with the Venari and feel lots of phalanxes of stuff and have them all ordered and responding to commands on site and fighting as one. Very cool, very awesome. I really like this one particularly. Their main gimmick is that each time you target a Venari unit with a command ability, you can select another unit of Venari within 3 inches to get the same command ability for free. So you can really spread around the rerolls and the ignore battle shocks, and it encourages you to fight in close groups. It's really much a phalanx. This is, once again, a very defensive faction. Stick together, stick close, fight in formation with allies nearby, watch your flanks. The cavalry are really the only guys that are going to be going out ahead, and even then you want them tag teaming stuff. So, very nice. You've got, the ability to select one Illinoth Venari unit with 2 or more models, and they get to reroll hit rolls of 1. Sweet. And that's for both shooting and combat. You get them extra bravery, so that you don't have to use Aether Quartz all the time. And they have an amulet, which lets your hero come back to life on a 4+. It's a more reliable Phoenix Stone, but it can't do wacky things like bring back Teclis on a magical 6. You got Zaytrik, which is more spellcaster focused. This is the one where if you want to take advantage of the fact that this army really relies on its spells and magic, and making that as reliable as possible, then this is a good city-state to lean into. Their first cast Unbind or Dispel of each hero phase gets +1, and each wizard knows an extra spell. And you have a lot of wizards. So awesome. You have Fast Learner. So that's awesome. So your general can dispel 1 additional spell, so you can anti-magic pretty good. There's an artifact which gives you some ignore wounds and is better with Teclis. This one, particularly because of Teclis' nature, works better with him. And then, of course, you get a decent spell that's relatively meh. But the key thing that I really like about the spell is that it halves movement and they take damage, potentially. So, awesome. And then your Metrica is, as we've already talked about, this is for playing the Alareth, and it's all about the Alareth. So the Mountain Stance ignores -2 rend, so literally they need -3 rend to, in which case you're always going to have a 4-up save or no save. So, awesome. The ability to use Tectonic Force again as a command ability. An okay relic that gives you kind of a best of everything, but not really too great. And command ability, or command trait that's just kind of bad. So, now we'll quickly talk about their spell laws before we talk about the units real quick and then wrap this all up. We've already talked about the units to some extent, but we'll give them that. So you have 2 spell laws, the Law of Heightened and the Law of Mountains, and you have your endless spells. The Law of Heightened is available to your Cathalar and most of your generic Venari. The Law of the Mountains is only available to your Alarith. So, only your Alarith Mountain guy. And so the Law of Heightened is very buff-based. It's very good with its buffs. Speed of Heightened is a mandatory spell. You cast it on a 5, and you get to double the movement of a friendly unit with an 18 inches caster. Cool, you were moving slow 4 inches before, now you're moving 8. Or now you're moving 6. And then, of course, you're still able to run. So you're still moving super duper fast. This lets your cavalry, literally, I think I did the math on this. It's something like you can reach a potential 26 inches across the board with your cavalry. So, awesome. That is why, sure, you seem slow on the surface, but then it's your spells. Magic is everything for your army. Solar Flare lets you immediately... It's hard to cast, but it lets you just get rid of, an endless spell and potentially do damage and muck up an enemy wizard's next casting or unbinds their spells. Lambent Light lets you re-roll your attacks from missile weapons on a really low cast value. So it's awesome for those Sentinels that you have, because your archers are very good in terms of their accuracy, but they don't have a lot of shooting attacks. So, and what you really want is to get enough attacks so that you can try and generate some sun metal attacks, which gives you mortal wounds. And of course, I've glossed over the power of Heish, which is on most of the war scrolls, but it lets your sun metal weapons deal mortal wounds on a 5+ instead of 6+. So you combine those two if you on your archers to really just be peppering things with lots of mortal wounds. That's the goal there. Ethereal Blessing, which cast on a 6 to let you just immediately ignore all rend, is amazing. Like, this army is really hard to damage. You have excellent saves. You will die. You only have 1 wound and not a lot of ways to ignore damage, but you have a lot of ways to prevent getting hit in the first place. Total Eclipse is a really hard cast and a really obnoxious debuff that until your next hero phase, your opponent has to spend 2 command abilities instead of 1 whenever they use a command ability. Certain armies will really, really hate that. And of course, you can tailor these and pick spells after you've seen your opponent's army. That's an important thing to keep in mind. I mean, most organized events and tournaments have specific rules that they won't always allow that. But in typical play, you're not locked into these until you pick them at the start of the battle. And then Protection of Heish, which I was just saying, you don't get a lot of access to ignoring damage, but hey, here's a spell that's really hard to cast on an 8, but 9-inch wholly within aura of 5+ to ignore damage. Law of Heish is amazing. It is phenomenal. So this is the reason why you're going to probably want more Cathalar in any kind of mixed build and Venari build than you are Alarith Stone Mages. Then you have your Law of the Mountains. Now this is a much more underwhelming law with a lot more stuff about dealing mortal wounds and messing with enemies. The real one to keep in mind as you're coming into the Lumineth Realm Lords and getting used to them, the one that you want is the Crippling Vertigo. You pick an enemy unit within 18 inches of the caster, you cast this on a 6. Until your next hero phase, you roll 2d6 each time the unit tries to make a normal move, pile in, or charge roll. If it's higher than that unit's bravery, it cannot make that move. So, remembering that units such as Ossiarch stuff and Sons of Behemoth and other things that are immune to morale, maybe, for example, witches under Witch Brew, some Slaves to Darkness stuff affected by the Chaos Undivided aura. All those things that don't give a care about battle shock. And this is an army with lots of ways to lower bravery. Sure, they're not taking any battle shock tests, but you're still lowering their bravery. And then you're rolling 2d6, and if you roll higher than that, they don't get to do anything. They don't get to move. And not moving in Age of Sigmar is really strong. So, the only thing that this actually doesn't work on, the only faction, is Seraphon, particularly the Coalesced Seraphon, because they never take any modifiers to their bravery. So that's the only hard counter to this. And even then, Seraphon are going to struggle against you. They're not good. And you have lots of other ways to do it. You have Voice of the Mountains, which, you just give an enemy unit -2 to their bravery. You have ways of Living Fissure, Drawing Lines, Entomb. And that's not taking into account the ability that the Alorith already has going in. Then we have your Endless Spells. The Endless Spells are okay. The Sanctum of Amontok for 30 points is a nice little defensive thing to protect your spellcaster. So, pretty good for setting that up in a defensive formation, which, hey, guess what? That's the theme of your army. The Twin Stones, they get charges each time you cast a spell, and while your wizard is within 12 inches of it, you can choose to add the value of the charges to the casting roll. For 30 points, it's very good. It's something that you want to basically deploy in the middle of your phalanx and be using, and it basically gives you good ways to get more of that reliability for those amazing spells, particularly from the Lore of Haish and Sun Metal, off. Like, some of the really good spells are really easy to cast, but this is very good for ensuring that you never fail, and ensuring that you can get those harder to cast spells off when you need them. The Runes of Petrification for 70 points, they are your offensive spell. You can use them to block movement. For anyone familiar with the Skaven Warp Lightning Vortex, it behaves very much like that. The effect being it's a little less effective, but it's still pretty good for what it does, and it spits out mortal wounds a lot potentially. Not as much as the Lightning Vortex, which is why it's cheaper, and it messes with a little bit of movement. So, now we finally reach the units where we'll just talk about this very briefly. You have Teclis currently. Very expensive, godlike a model, super wizard, very good. He's a huge points sink, and people will hate you, particularly with how good some of your spells are. He's really ludicrous in terms of his spellcasting and kind of oppressive. And the funny thing is, he's more anti-magic than he is magic, in my opinion, with just the sheer amount of unbinds that he can do, and how reliably he can do it. So, there's that. On top of that, he's got some crazy unique spells. There's an aura he's got that lets units ignore spells on a 4+. Like, he's super anti-magic and super magic at the same time. So he can play the magic game. Don't put him in combat, though. Is he something that you should buy when you first get into them? Hell no. Teclis is something you should get after you've already assembled the foundations of your army. If you want to build around Teclis, you can do it, of course, obviously. He's a quarter of your army, but it's probably better to get all the other things first, because Teclis is, once again, everything is super specialized, right? Teclis is specialized in one particular thing that you don't need in order to win, but it makes your army and go from, yeah, I can compete, I'm pretty good, I'm average, this is nice, I'm not particularly overpowered, I've got some fun gimmicks, to, please, just go away. So, there's that. You have the Light of Eltharion, a really expensive, choppy unit. He's kind of just a he's kind of a missile. You kind of just send him forward and throw him at a heavily armored unit. And, he'll do work. He's your melee hero. But he's super expensive for what he does. So, keep that in mind. At the same time, I would, compared to Teclis, Eltharion is something you probably should get to begin with, and have there not as an auto-include, but as something you can include depending on how you want to build your list, if you feel like you're lacking a particularly good, strong duelist. Avanlor, the Stoneheart King. Awesome, hard-hitting. Super hard-hitting, right? Unless you're really, really going for the Alarith build, I would suggest buying first one of these kits and building a regular Spirit of the Mountain, and then buying Avanlor. Just because the Spirit of the Mountain is cheaper, has some really cool stuff, performs, he doesn't do all the same things, but he's your hard-hitting beat stick, and he's also got a command ability to give you +1 attack to your Alarith units. So, decent, right? You'll probably want at least one Alarith Spirit of the Mountain in just about every list. You're not paying too much more for Avanlor the Stoneheart King, but the generic Spirit of the Mountain is, again, that just touch bit cheaper. So you probably want one of each. But, again, you don't have too many heroes competing for the slots, so he's a pretty good pick. So, then, once again, we've already talked about the Stone Mage and the Cathalar. They're pretty nice. The Stone Mage can really mess with units' movements, as we talked about, and enhances the Spirit of the Mountains. The Cenari Cathalar, again, messes with Bravery. The two of them actually pair really nicely, even if the mixed build is really good. The Arlen Wardens are your defensive, sit in a spear, 120 points, minimum squad 10, maximum 30. They have really long-ranged pikes. They're okay in terms of what they do. They have the occasional gimmick of mortal wounds. They have their sun medals. And again, it's all about just picking at the opponents over time while taking the hits back and shrugging them off and sitting on objectives. Your Dawn Riders are for taking the attack 2 guys and mowing down enemy hordes, which we know are really powerful, but they're really bad against super elite units. Low model count, high wound stuff. Don't throw them at ogres, don't throw them at monsters, don't throw them at giants, don't throw them at trolls. Don't even throw them at enemy cavalry. Throw them at 1 to 2 wound infantry with low saves. Skaven will hate them. Leave the hard armored units to your Stone Guard or Sentinels. The Sentinels are a little bit more expensive than both the Dawn Riders and Wardens, but they're very good because they have really good range. You can make their shooting very reliable. You can use their Sun Metal to increase their power, and just try and shove mortal wounds across the battlefield. It is very good for wearing down the hard-hitting units that your opponent has, the things that are heavily armored. Their Terrorgeists, picking off their characters with just getting some mortal wounds through. The ability to tear down those really heavily armored and just put some damage on things and help bracket them. Things like big monsters. This is what that is. These aren't anti-horde. These are your anti-elite choices. And then they do that from a range. And then the Arliss Stone Guard come in as your elite unit to be the hammer, if you understand the pun, to your Warden's anvil. And the Stone Guard, they're not battle line, they are other choices, unless you're Metrica. And they have basically a weapon for getting through armor with the mortal wounds with the pick, or they have a weapon with the hammer, which is better for dealing with larger units that have less armor but more wounds. So, hordes, essentially. Or elite infantry with low armor saves. And that's it. Now, they have 3 really simple battalions. I will really say that their battalions are really easy to build into, and you could probably build into any one of them. They, particularly the Alareth Temple, the Aurelian Legion, it's actually possible to build both of these. Same with the Dawnrider Lance. It's possible to include 2 different battalions in a single army with this, guys, because you don't have a lot of choices and you want most of these things anyway. So, we've gone a little bit over time compared to what I wanted, and I could keep talking about these guys and go deeper into the tactics of how you can use them. But we'll leave that for the comments section and on the Discord, where you can contact me and get real live response and talk about things more in depth if you really want to. In the meantime, that's been Beginner's Guide to Age of Sigmar for the Lumineth Realm Lords. Everything you need to know about this new faction right off the bat as it currently stands. Some new things might come out for in the future, which of course I'll do an update video for. But that's it. And I hope this has helped you understand the Lumineth Realm Lords a bit better and help you kind of figure out how and where to start when it comes to collecting and using these guys. So, thank you very much for watching. I have been Jay from Jade Productions. I will see you next time.